"Stop the lies!" The stray's silent protest seemed to echo down the narrow, rain-slicked street, as if the very night itself had found its voice. In a modest, aging home on the edge of a sleepy town, Evelyn Carter prepared her evening tea with trembling hands. Her silver hair, once a crown of wisdom, now lay like delicate threads in the pale lamplight. Outside, in the murk of a storm-tossed alley, a lean, matted stray with watchful, stormy eyes crouched in the shadows. This dog, whose presence was as unassuming as a ghost in the twilight, had taken it upon itself to guard Evelyn from a threat that lurked far closer than any human stray, a threat borne by those she had once trusted. Evelyn had spent decades nurturing young minds, but now the burdens of age pressed upon her like a relentless tide. With each measured step on the creaking wooden floors of her quaint home, a house that had seen more laughter and sorrow than most could fathom, the old woman carried the weight of unspoken memories. The walls, adorned with faded photographs and worn mementos of a life well lived, now bore witness to a growing disquiet. For behind the warm, familiar facade of family visits and gentle reassurances, a dark undercurrent of greed had begun to swirl, poisoning the love she once believed was unconditional. Across town, in a grand yet suffocating mansion draped in opulent decay, Evelyn's distant relatives convened in hushed tones. Their eyes, cold and calculating, gleamed with the promise of fortune. The inheritance that awaited her was not a gift born of affection, but a prize to be wrested by force, a sinister scheme that had been meticulously crafted over quiet dinners and clandestine meetings. These relatives, shrouded in respectability by day, revealed their true faces in the shadow of twilight. Their smiles, sharp as broken glass, concealed the monstrous ambition that would stop at nothing to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. The stray, known among the hidden corners of the town as Rufus, had roamed these streets long enough to know that the world was not as it seemed. His life had been one of survival, marked by battles against hunger and the unkindness of indifferent passers-by. Yet in Rufus's wandering, fate had drawn him to Evelyn, a fragile soul ensnared in a web of deceit. It was as if the universe had whispered a secret to him, urging him to take up arms with nothing more than instinct and a heart as fierce as a roaring tempest. In his silent vigil, Rufus became both guardian and avenger, his every muscle coiled with an unspoken promise to shatter the carefully laid plans of those who sought to exploit the vulnerable. On a particularly damp evening, when the heavens wept and the cobblestones shimmered with reflective melancholy, Evelyn stepped outside to collect a few packages left by a kindly neighbor. The chill in the air was palpable, each breath a visible ghost in the darkness. Unbeknownst to her, a sleek, black sedan idled at the curb, a vehicle as sinister in its stillness as the intentions of its occupants. The relative in the driver's seat, eyes narrowed in anticipation, watched her with a predator's focus. For him, every ordinary act in her life was a step toward a final betrayal, a betrayal that would allow him to seize control of her fortune and, with it, her remaining dignity. As Evelyn trudged along the slick pavement, her world blurred by a mixture of fatigue and the soft drizzle of rain, Rufus emerged from his shadowy retreat. He padded silently beside her, an unexpected guardian in a world that had lost its way. His fur, tousled by the winds of hardship, glistened with droplets of rain that seemed to mirror the glimmer of hope in his resolute eyes. In that moment, a connection forged by fate and necessity bound them together, a tacit understanding that some souls, no matter how scarred by life's cruelty, were meant to fight for what was just. The ensuing hours were a tapestry of stark contrasts. Inside the cramped living room of Evelyn's home, the comforting clink of teacups and the murmur of a cherished old radio filled the space with a semblance of normalcy. Every object in the room, each creaking floorboard, every faded painting, told a story of a bygone era, a time when trust was a given and love was unconditional. Yet, outside those walls, the atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension, as if the very air had conspired to warn of impending doom. The family's mansion, with its ornate decor and deceptive grandeur, loomed in a distant memory, a reminder that appearances can be as fragile as spun glass. Rufus, though merely a stray, embodied the raw courage that often lies hidden beneath the surface of ordinary existence. With every cautious step he took, the dog surveyed his surroundings like a seasoned sentinel. His ears pricked at every distant sound, his eyes tracking the silhouette of that black sedan as it blended with the murky outlines of the night. He remembered too well the cruelty of men, the discarded scraps of promises, the hollow words spoken behind closed doors, and it was that memory that stoked the embers of his protective instinct. In the ensuing days, subtle changes began to ripple through Evelyn's once peaceful routine. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones about strange occurrences, a missing letter, a mislaid set of keys, and an unsettling presence at the door that seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared. Yet none could piece together the silent symphony of treachery that was unfolding around the elderly woman. The subtle art of manipulation was at play, woven into the fabric of daily interactions, rendering the threat both invisible and insidious. And at the heart of it all, Rufus watched with a growing sense of determination, his every glance a silent challenge to the darkness encroaching upon Evelyn's life. One brisk autumn afternoon, when the trees had begun their slow transformation into a riot of fiery hues, Evelyn decided to take a short walk to the nearby park, a place that had once been her sanctuary. The park was a modest green space, bordered by aging brick buildings and the low hum of urban life. Children's laughter, though distant, mingled with the rustle of fallen leaves, creating an auditory collage of simple joys and forgotten sorrows. It was here, amidst the mundane beauty of everyday life, that the first real cracks in the sinister inheritance scheme started to show. A family member, one of the more overt conspirators, whose eyes gleamed with a mix of ambition and desperation, had followed Evelyn, his presence as unwanted as a shadow at noon. He was known to the locals as Jonathan, a man whose charm was as brittle as dried leaves and whose promises were nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Jonathan's intentions were as transparent as the morning dew, yet he cloaked his ambitions in layers of false concern. As Evelyn sat on a weathered bench beneath a sprawling oak, lost in memories of youth and quiet resignation, Jonathan crept closer, his steps measured and predatory. Rufus, ever the vigilant guardian, sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The air seemed to crackle with tension, as if nature itself had drawn a line between what was right and what was wrong. The stray's muscles tensed, his body coiling like a spring ready to unleash a force of nature. In a heartbeat, he bounded forward, his bark a low, resonant warning that shattered the deceptive calm of the park. The sound was not a mere canine cry, it was a declaration, a promise of retribution that reverberated through the crisp autumn air. Evelyn startled, her eyes widening in a mix of surprise and relief as she watched the dog position himself between her and the approaching man. In that split second, time seemed to slow, every detail etched in sharp relief, the glint of determination in Rufus's eyes, the tremor in Evelyn's hands as she clutched her shawl, and the cold, calculating gaze of Jonathan as he hesitated, caught off guard by the fierce loyalty of an unlikely protector. The moment was charged with an intensity that defied explanation, a collision of innocence and malice that would forever alter the course of their intertwined lives. The confrontation in the park was brief but searing. Jonathan, realizing that his meticulously planned subterfuge was unraveling, muttered an apology that reeked of insincerity before retreating into the maze of city streets. His departure did little to quell the lingering dread that had seeped into the soul of the place, a dread that whispered of deeper conspiracies and darker deeds yet to be revealed. Evelyn, her heart pounding like a caged bird desperate for escape, felt both shaken and inexplicably comforted by the stray's intervention. It was as if fate had ordained that this ragged canine was not merely an accidental bystander but a vital force, a guardian angel in the guise of a common mutt. Back at her modest home, a place that now seemed both a haven and a fragile fortress, Evelyn began to piece together the fragments of her unsettling reality. Over cups of lukewarm tea and quiet conversations with trusted neighbors, she started to notice the subtle signs of betrayal. Unreturned phone calls, suspicious gaps in the family's visits, and fleeting glances that hinted at secrets too dark to be spoken aloud. The once comforting routines of her daily life were now interlaced with moments of stark, unrelenting anxiety. And all the while, Rufus remained a steadfast presence, a silent witness to the mounting tension and an unwavering sentinel against the encroaching storm. In the days that followed, the interplay between ordinary life and the specter of a calculated fraud became ever more pronounced. The town, with its familiar rhythms and unspoken codes, took on a dual character, a place where the ordinary and the extraordinary coexisted in a delicate, volatile balance. In the background of quiet street conversations and the routine shuffle of daily errands, the murmur of something unspeakably sinister grew louder. The inheritance scheme, which had once seemed like a mere shadow on the horizon, now loomed with an almost tangible menace. Each clandestine meeting, every furtive phone call, added another layer to the intricate web of deceit that threatened to ensnare Evelyn in its ruthless grip. Rufus, though unable to understand the complexities of human greed and betrayal, instinctively sensed the shift in the wind. His nights became a vigilant patrol, traversing the perimeter of Evelyn's property and the adjacent alleyways with a purpose that defied his humble origins. Every rustle in the underbrush, every distant sound in the dead of night, set his nerves alight with a quiet fury. For him, the struggle was not just about survival, it was about justice, about defending a soul whose light had been dimmed by the relentless machinations of those who thrived on exploitation. In one of those long, sleepless nights when the world seemed to be caught in a limbo between hope and despair, Evelyn awoke to the sound of soft, persistent scratching at her door. The old wood creaked under the weight of time, and for a moment, she hesitated, uncertain whether to trust the call of a familiar friend or the whisper of danger. But then, as if compelled by a force beyond her own will, she inched forward and slowly opened the door. There, bathed in the pale glow of a flickering street lamp, stood Rufus, his eyes gleaming with an almost human intensity. In that silent communion, words were unnecessary. The stray's presence was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, loyalty and love could manifest in the most unexpected forms. The following morning brought no respite from the undercurrent of tension. The sky was an overcast canvas, its grey hues reflecting the muted despair that had settled over the town. Evelyn, determined to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, decided to visit the local market, a small, bustling place where the clamour of daily commerce masked the silent struggles of its inhabitants. Amid the colourful stalls and the aroma of freshly baked bread, she found herself momentarily distracted by the simple pleasure of human interaction. Yet, as she exchanged pleasantries with the vendors and admired the vibrant displays of produce, an unsettling thought nagged at the back of her mind. Each friendly smile and warm greeting carried with it the weight of a secret that threatened to shatter the fragile peace she had so carefully constructed. It was during one such visit that Evelyn's distant relatives made their presence known in the most unexpected of ways. A well-dressed man, whose polished manners and courteous demeanor barely concealed the predatory glint in his eyes, approached her with an air of feigned concern. He spoke in gentle tones about financial planning and the advantages of securing one's future, his words carefully crafted to lull her into a false sense of security. Yet, behind the veneer of civility, every syllable dripped with the calculated precision of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of deceit. Evelyn listened, her mind a swirling vortex of conflicting emotions, gratitude for the attention mingled with an inexplicable unease that seemed to intensify with every passing moment. As the market scene faded into the background, the story of Evelyn and Rufus continued to unfold with a quiet urgency. The stray's protective instincts deepened with every encounter, and his silent vigil grew ever more resolute. Though he roamed the twilight hours and patrolled the edges of human frailty, Rufus remained tethered to a singular, unyielding purpose, to shield Evelyn from the machinations of those who would reduce her existence to a mere transaction. His actions, raw and unfiltered, were imbued with a sincerity that spoke to the enduring power of empathy, a power that, even in a world tainted by greed, could not be extinguished. In the midst of this simmering tension, the ordinary spaces of Evelyn's life began to reveal hidden depths. Her modest home, once a repository of benign memories, now pulsed with the echoes of long-forgotten promises and whispered warnings. The faded wallpaper, the worn armchair, the gentle ticking of an ancient clock, all became silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. Every creak in the floorboards, every sigh of the wind outside the window, seemed to carry the burden of a secret too profound to be ignored. And through it all, Rufus remained at her side, a living embodiment of resistance against a tide of treachery that threatened to drown her in sorrow. As dusk fell on another weary day, Evelyn found herself drawn to the small, unassuming park that had once offered her solace. Beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient oak, she sat in contemplative silence, her thoughts adrift in a sea of uncertainties. The world around her was a study in contrasts, flickering shadows danced with the last vestiges of daylight, and the gentle rustle of leaves belied the turbulent currents of human ambition that swirled just beyond her reach. In that suspended moment, the boundaries between past and present, trust and betrayal, seemed to blur into an indistinguishable haze. And yet, amid the encroaching gloom, the steadfast presence of Rufus shone like a beacon of hope, a reminder that even the most unremarkable of lives could be touched by extraordinary acts of courage. In the subtle interplay of light and darkness, the foundation of a hidden war was being laid. The family's sinister inheritance scheme, once an abstract concept whispered in the corridors of power, now took on a menacing clarity. Every stolen glance, every furtive conversation, hinted at an underlying truth that was as inescapable as it was horrifying. Evelyn, with her quiet resilience and unassuming grace, had unwittingly become the epicenter of a conflict that defied the ordinary confines of everyday life. And as the chill of the evening deepened and the first stars began to pierce the velvet sky, Rufus's vigilant gaze spoke of battles yet to be fought, a silent vow to protect, at all costs, the fragile light of hope that still flickered in the heart of his beloved charge. The night carried on with an almost unbearable stillness, punctuated only by the soft patter of rain against old windows and the distant hum of a world that had forgotten how to dream. In that silence, the true nature of the looming threat began to crystallize, a threat that was not born of supernatural forces or the realms of fantasy, but of cold, calculated human ambition. And though the details of the inheritance scheme were as labyrinthine as they were nefarious, the essence of the betrayal was unmistakable. Evelyn's own kin, those who were meant to protect and cherish her, had instead conspired in a dance of deception, driven by a hunger that transcended familial duty. As the hours of the night slipped by in a slow, agonizing procession, the unlikely pair, elderly Evelyn and her steadfast guardian Rufus, found themselves caught in the inexorable pull of fate. Their journey, marked by quiet heroism and moments of profound vulnerability, was just beginning to reveal its full measure. In the charged atmosphere of that long, fateful night, the line between ordinary life and the extraordinary blurred, forging a bond that would defy the conventions of trust and treachery. Every moment, every heartbeat resonated with the tension of unspoken truths and the promise of an uncertain tomorrow. And as the first hints of dawn began to streak the horizon with pale light, the silent pact between a determined stray and a woman betrayed by those she loved took shape, a pact born of loyalty, of shared suffering, and the unyielding resolve to confront a darkness that had seeped into the very fabric of their lives. The city awoke to a new day, its streets bathed in the soft glow of early sunlight that offered little solace to those aware of the simmering menace beneath its surface. Evelyn, with a cautious hope in her heart, prepared for the day ahead, every step a defiant act of survival against forces that sought to crush her spirit. And through it all, Rufus remained by her side, his every glance and gesture a silent pledge to shield her from the treachery that threatened to consume her world. In the quiet moments of that morning, as the town stirred to life, a new chapter in their struggle was set in motion. The intricate dance between deceit and loyalty, between the mundane and the macabre, had only just begun. And in the resolute eyes of a stray dog, there burned a promise that even in a world rife with betrayal, the pure, unyielding power of love and protection would always find a way to triumph. The day unfolded slowly, each hour steeped in the bittersweet mixture of routine and dread. As Evelyn moved about her modest home, dust mote swirling in the rays of a timid sun, each familiar creak of the floor a reminder of a past filled with both joy and sorrow, the quiet strength of her character shone through. Her every action, though laced with the inevitable fragility of advancing years, carried an undeniable defiance against the forces that conspired to exploit her vulnerability. And in the tender interplay of morning light and lingering shadows, the stray silent presence was as reassuring as it was unspoken, a guardian angel forged from the hardships of the street, unwavering in his duty to protect the one soul who had, perhaps unknowingly, rekindled a spark of hope in his battered heart. Thus began a day like no other, where beneath the veneer of ordinary life lay the seeds of a struggle that would soon burst forth into something both terrifying and transformative. The bonds of family, once thought to be unbreakable, were now under the strain of avarice and betrayal. And while Evelyn's world seemed to teeter on the brink of collapse, the unyielding devotion of a stray dog promised that even the darkest plots could be defied by the purity of a heart determined to do what was right. In the gentle unfolding of that morning, as neighbors greeted one another with cautious smiles and whispered greetings, an unspoken awareness passed between those who sensed that something was amiss. There was an air of expectancy, a latent charge that electrified the otherwise mundane motions of daily life. And for Evelyn and Rufus, that day marked not just another turn of the earth, but the commencement of a battle in which the forces of greed would be confronted by the quiet, relentless power of compassion and courage. Every heartbeat of that day, every measured step along the cracked sidewalks and worn cobblestone paths, contributed to the mosaic of a story that was as profoundly real as it was startlingly unexpected. And though the full scale of the treachery was still shrouded in the mists of conspiracy, one truth stood clear amid the uncertainties. In a world where familial love could be manipulated into a weapon of exploitation, the pure, unyielding loyalty of a stray dog had become the most potent force of all. The echoes of that first day resonated far beyond the confines of Evelyn's modest world, rippling outward to touch the lives of those who had long lost faith in the possibility of genuine kindness. And in the quiet, persistent vigilance of Rufus, the scruffy, unassuming savior who had risked everything to stand between Evelyn and the cold machinations of a sinister inheritance, the promise of redemption glimmered like a beacon in the encroaching gloom. As the town slowly awakened to the new day, every ray of sunlight seemed to hold a quiet challenge to expose the darkness hidden behind the polished smiles of those who sought to exploit the vulnerable. And though the path ahead was fraught with peril and uncertainty, the alliance between Evelyn and her unlikely protector promised that even in the face of overwhelming betrayal, there would always be a spark of defiant hope, a hope that would illuminate the murky corners of a world all too willing to surrender to greed and treachery. In this fragile yet unyielding dawn, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of trust and the resilience of the human spirit. And as the day advanced, each moment infused with both quiet beauty and an undercurrent of menace, the silent pact between a determined stray and an elderly woman became the catalyst for an unfolding drama, a drama where every whispered secret and every furtive glance was a reminder that sometimes, the most unassuming heroes are the ones who change the course of destiny. The day's light, pale and hesitant, offered little comfort as the quiet war waged on behind closed doors and whispered confessions. In the days that followed that fateful morning, an uneasy transformation began to permeate Evelyn's once tranquil existence. The once familiar cadence of her daily routines now carried a subtle dissonance, a muted dirge that spoke of hidden threats and long-buried secrets. Evelyn found herself increasingly isolated, her every interaction tinged with suspicion. The neighbor who had always greeted her with a warm smile now seemed to harbor a wary glance, as if silently acknowledging the dark current swirling beneath the surface of her life. In her modest kitchen, while stirring a pot of soup that filled the room with the comforting aroma of home-cooked warmth, she caught fragments of hushed conversations echoing in the corridors of memory. These fleeting whispers hinted at alliances forged in greed and the gradual erosion of familial bonds. At the heart of this unsettling change, Rufus remained a steadfast sentinel. His alert eyes roamed every corner of the small, time-worn home, and his sensitive ears picked up even the slightest murmur of duplicity. When Evelyn attempted to immerse herself in the solace of a well-worn book or a cherished melody on the old radio, Rufus's vigilant presence never waned. The stray's nightly patrols grew more determined, as if every step on the creaking floorboards was a silent vow to unmask the deceit lurking within the walls of her life. It was on a chilly afternoon, when autumn's breath carried a hint of impending winter, that Evelyn's suspicions began to solidify. An unexpected knock at her door shattered the fragile calm. Opening it with measured trepidation, she found a slender envelope, its paper thick with a quality that betrayed careful handling. No name adorned the envelope, no return address offered any clue, only the faintest hint of a familiar, yet distant, scent of perfume long past. Inside lay a series of handwritten notes and documents, their edges worn by time, hinting at financial discrepancies, concealed bank accounts, and the unspoken machinations of those closest to her. Evelyn's heart pounded like a caged bird as she spread the documents across her dining table. The elegant script danced before her eyes, each line a stark reminder of the betrayal she had never dared to imagine. The words leapt off the page, painting a picture of a meticulously orchestrated scheme, a plan to usurp her inheritance, a legacy built not on the steadfast love of kin, but on a foundation of calculated ambition and cold, unfeeling greed. Her once unshakable trust in family had been eroded, replaced by the creeping certainty that even the gentlest smiles could hide the most vicious intentions. Unable to decipher the labyrinth of financial jargon and legal subtleties on her own, Evelyn reached out to a trusted friend, a retired accountant named Mr. Hughes, whose unassuming wisdom had once guided her through the complexities of life's many uncertainties. In a small, cluttered office behind the local bank, they pored over the documents by the light of a flickering desk lamp. Mr. Hughes's experienced eyes narrowed as he traced the convoluted web of transactions and shadowy figures. His voice, soft yet laced with grim determination, confirmed what Evelyn had long feared. Her relatives had been methodically siphoning funds, hiding behind layers of legal jargon and obscure corporate structures. As Mr. Hughes explained the details, a storm raged outside, its howling winds and torrential rain echoing the turmoil in Evelyn's heart. The accountant's words were deliberate, each syllable a clarion call to the harsh reality that had taken root in her life. "They're not here for your well-being," he murmured, his tone heavy with regret. "They're here to claim what they believe is yours, regardless of the cost to your dignity." In that moment, Evelyn felt a profound loneliness, a realization that the bonds of blood, once held sacred, had been corroded by the relentless pursuit of wealth. Even as the truth began to settle, the world outside continued its indifferent march. The streets, washed in the relentless drizzle of rain, bore silent witness to the unfolding drama. Evelyn's home, a modest haven that had once brimmed with the warmth of shared laughter and heartfelt memories, now seemed to pulse with an undercurrent of menace. The familiar creaks and sighs of the old structure took on an ominous quality, as though the very house was aware of the treachery unfolding within its walls. Amid this swirl of despair, a new figure entered the periphery, a woman named Marianne, whose quiet dignity belied a steely resolve. Marianne had been a distant cousin, one whom Evelyn rarely saw, but who, by some twist of fate, had always carried an air of integrity that set her apart. It was Marianne who, too, had begun to sense the rot within the family structure. Their chance meeting occurred on a brisk morning in the local library, a place that had long served as a sanctuary for those seeking solace in the written word. Marianne's eyes, bright with a mix of sorrow and determination, met Evelyn's across a shared table scattered with old newspapers and financial reports. Without a word, the two women exchanged a look that spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement that the forces arrayed against them were formidable, but that together they might yet uncover the truth. Over cups of bitter coffee in the quiet back room of the library, Marianne and Evelyn delved into the murky details of the inheritance. The conversation was laced with raw emotion, punctuated by long pauses as each woman grappled with the painful realization that those who claimed to be family could be as treacherous as the darkest conspiracies. Marianne recounted stories of whispered threats and furtive glances at family gatherings, an undercurrent of suspicion that had, until now, been dismissed as mere paranoia. Together, they began to map out the intricate network of deceit, their voices lowering to hushed tones as if the very air might betray their plans. Meanwhile, Rufus's nightly journeys grew ever more perilous. On one such venture, as the moon hung low in a starless sky, the stray found himself drawn to the silent facade of an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. The building, a relic of forgotten industry, exuded an aura of desolation and decay, its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls serving as a stark counterpoint to the carefully manicured facades of the family mansions. Here, Rufus discovered more than just the echoes of his own pause. He uncovered evidence of clandestine meetings, a series of furtive exchanges between men cloaked in shadows. The stray's instincts, honed by years of surviving on the unforgiving streets, sensed that the warehouse was a nexus of the conspirators' activities. Though he could not grasp the full import of what he saw, a discarded ledger, a hastily scrawled note, Rufus's presence served as a silent alarm, a beacon of unwavering loyalty destined to expose the malevolent truths hidden within that forsaken place. As the days bled into nights and the tension in Evelyn's life grew ever more palpable, the dual narratives of human greed and canine fidelity converged into a single, relentless surge of determination. Evelyn, fortified by Marianne's unexpected alliance and Mr. Hughes's grim certainties, began to muster the courage to confront her would-be usurpers. In the intimate confines of her modest living room, with the flicker of a lone candle casting quivering shadows on the walls, she penned a series of letters. These missives, addressed to local authorities and trusted community leaders, recounted her suspicions and the incriminating evidence that had slowly amassed over months of quiet vigilance. Each word was a deliberate act of defiance, a reclaiming of the dignity that her treacherous relatives had sought to strip away. Yet even as she prepared to step into the public arena and expose the dark underbelly of her own bloodline, Evelyn could not shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. The confrontation that loomed on the horizon promised to be as much an internal reckoning as an external one. The delicate balance between trust and betrayal, between love and avarice, had already begun to tip precariously. With each passing day, the room for reconciliation dwindled, replaced instead by an inexorable march toward an uncertain climax. That fateful evening, as twilight surrendered to the encroaching darkness, Evelyn felt the weight of impending reckoning. The sky, heavy with unshed rain and the murmur of distant thunder, mirrored the tumult within her soul. In the silent solitude of her garden, a small enclave surrounded by weathered hedges and the soft rustle of autumn leaves, she met Marianne once more. Their conversation, carried on a hush of vulnerability and resolve, turned to plans of action. There would be a public meeting, discreet yet firm, where the layers of deceit would finally be peeled back to reveal the naked truth. The idea was both audacious and terrifying, for it meant challenging not only the greed of those who had once claimed kinship, but also the unyielding societal norms that often protected such injustices. Rufus, ever the embodiment of loyalty, patrolled the perimeter of the garden with an intensity that belied his unassuming nature. Every rustle in the underbrush, every distant footfall in the night, was met with a low, steady growl, a signal that the vigilant guardian was prepared to confront any threat. His eyes, dark and earnest, seemed to implore Evelyn to trust in his unspoken promise that no matter the cost, he would not let the tendrils of treachery strangle the light in her heart. In the days that followed, as preparations for the public reckoning unfolded in quiet urgency, the fabric of the community began to tremble under the strain of suppressed secrets. Neighbors, once content to exchange polite greetings and routine nods of acknowledgement, now exchanged furtive glances and whispered speculations. The local newspaper, a modest publication known more for its community bulletins than hard-hitting investigations, received an anonymous tip, a call to look into the financial anomalies surrounding Evelyn's estate. This tip, brief and cryptic as it was, set in motion a series of inquiries that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed facade of respectability that had long shielded her relatives. Amid this swirling maelstrom of intrigue, Evelyn's internal struggle deepened. Memories of a simpler past, of laughter shared over Sunday dinners and the warm embrace of family reunions, clashed violently with the harsh, bitter reality of betrayal. Each recollection, tinted now with a bittersweet hue, became a double-edged sword, a reminder of what had been lost and a rallying cry for the courage to reclaim what was rightfully hers. And in the silent spaces between her thoughts, Rufus's steadfast presence provided the strength to face the oncoming storm. On a rain-drenched night, when the town lay shrouded in darkness, the conspirators made their next move. In a sleek, dark vehicle that blended seamlessly with the shadows, a group of relatives arrived at Evelyn's home under the guise of a routine visit. Their expressions were masks of feigned concern, their voices smooth and rehearsed, but the eyes behind the smiles betrayed a hunger that could not be quenched by mere words. They spoke in low tones, their conversation punctuated by fleeting glances toward the closed door, an unspoken acknowledgement that their carefully laid plans were in peril. Evelyn, having been forewarned by a nervous knock earlier that day, met their arrival with a quiet resolve. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of a woman who had seen too much to be easily swayed by empty assurances. With Marianne's discreet presence at her side and the evidence of betrayal laid bare, she refused to be the passive victim of their greed. In that moment, the once familiar living room transformed into a battleground where words were as potent as any weapon, and the quiet determination of a fragile heart challenged the monstrous ambitions of those who sought to devour it. As the relatives' visits grew more frequent and their tactics more brazen, the community began to rally in subtle solidarity with Evelyn. Neighbors, emboldened by her quiet courage, started to share their own stories of similar deceptions, tales of misplaced trust, and the corrosive effects of greed. The local library, the small bank, even the humble grocer's shop became unexpected forums for a silent revolution, as whispers of injustice blossomed into a collective call for accountability. And though the battle was being fought in the shadows, every act of defiance, every shared word of caution, contributed to a growing momentum that could no longer be ignored. Throughout it all, Rufus remained the steadfast, ever-watchful guardian, a silent force whose loyalty transcended the boundaries of language and expectation. His nightly vigils, patrolling both the familiar streets and the darker corners of the neighborhood, served as a constant reminder that even the smallest among us can become a beacon of resistance in the face of overwhelming treachery. Under the weight of mounting evidence and the unrelenting pressure of public scrutiny, the conspirators began to unravel. the meticulous network of deceit, once so impervious, started to show cracks as hidden alliances fractured under the glare of truth. In a final, desperate bid to salvage their ill-gotten gains, they convened in a secluded room within the grand mansion, a room that had once been the symbol of their shared prosperity but now resonated with the hollow echoes of impending defeat. The conversation that took place there, cloaked in furtive urgency and bitter regret, would eventually be laid bare for all to see, a testament to the inexorable power of truth and the unyielding resilience of the human spirit. In that pivotal moment, as the conspirators scrambled to reassemble their shattered plans, Evelyn's world began to shift. The quiet determination that had taken root in the heart of her modest home was now rippling outward, touching lives and igniting a spark of hope in a community long oppressed by silence. And through it all, the unlikely alliance between a gentle, dignified woman and a scruffy, unassuming stray dog continued to stand as a defiant testament to the enduring power of loyalty, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice. The night deepened, and the rain subsided into a soft, sorrowful drizzle as if mourning the loss of innocence. In the cool afterglow of confrontation, Evelyn's resolve crystallized, a silent promise to reclaim her life, piece by piece, from the clutches of those who had betrayed her trust. The journey ahead was uncertain and fraught with peril, yet in that fragile moment of clarity, she understood that the path to redemption was paved with truth, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of unexpected kinship. Thus, with the first tremors of a long-awaited reckoning echoing in every creaking floorboard and every rustling leaf, the stage was set for a decisive confrontation, a moment when the full weight of accumulated secrets would finally be unleashed. And as the community gathered its strength, united by a shared sense of justice and the unyielding will to protect its most vulnerable, the silent vigil of Rufus and the indomitable spirit of Evelyn shone forth as a beacon in the encroaching darkness, heralding the promise of a new dawn born from the ashes of betrayal. In the days that followed the public stir of Evelyn's revelations, the town found itself caught in a feverish limbo, a time when whispered secrets and furtive glances replaced the mundane certainties of daily life. A delicate balance of hope and trepidation had settled over the community like a thin, translucent veil. In quiet corners of local cafes and the hushed aisles of the modest supermarket, people exchanged wary looks and guarded words. It was as though the air itself had thickened with the anticipation of what was to come. Evelyn, emboldened by the support of her newfound allies and the undeniable evidence of her betrayal, began to orchestrate a subtle but determined counter-offensive. Late in the evening, as dusk melted into the cool indigo of night, she gathered with Marianne and Mr. Hughes in the sanctuary of her modest living room. The space, once a repository of gentle reminiscences, now thrummed with the charged intensity of a covert war council. Over a battered wooden table scarred by time, they pored over documents, cross-referencing financial ledgers with a determination that belied their gentle appearances. Every document, every seemingly inconspicuous note, was a piece of the intricate puzzle that would ultimately dismantle the insidious inheritance scheme. Outside, Rufus prowled with a singular focus that mirrored the determination within. Under the cover of darkness, his lithe form moved with a quiet grace across the dew-dampened pavement, his ears attuned to the murmur of conspiratorial voices that occasionally drifted on the wind. He revisited the abandoned warehouse, a decrepit structure that had become a silent witness to clandestine meetings, and confirmed that the web of deceit was far more extensive than anyone had dared to suspect. A discarded envelope here, a hastily scribbled note there, every piece of evidence seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of a conspiracy that reached into the very fabric of the town's high society. Meanwhile, Marianne set about mobilizing a discreet network of confidants among the town's more disillusioned citizens. There were those who had long suffered under the quiet tyranny of powerful families. Their stories, though muted by years of resignation, now found a voice in the collective outcry that was forming around Evelyn's plight. In quiet back rooms of community centers and behind the unassuming doors of local businesses, whispers of solidarity began to take shape. People spoke of injustice with a raw, unfiltered candor, a veritable litany of experiences that testified to the corrosive influence of greed and deception. And while the conspirators continued their maneuvers with practiced subtlety, the seeds of their undoing were being sown by a populace no longer willing to stand silent. One crisp evening, when the autumn air carried a promise of winter's chill, Evelyn found herself at the heart of a covert assembly at the old town hall, a building whose faded grandeur had once echoed with civic pride but now served as the clandestine meeting ground for those determined to see justice prevail. In the dim glow of scattered lanterns, the attendees formed a rough circle. Their faces were etched with a mixture of weariness and resolve, each one a silent testament to the bitter price of trust betrayed. At the center of this gathering, Evelyn, with Marianne at her side, spoke in a soft but resolute voice. She recounted her own painful journey, the quiet betrayal by those she had once loved, and the stark reality of a meticulously plotted scheme to defraud her of both dignity and inheritance. Her words, laden with the weight of personal anguish and righteous indignation, resonated with everyone present. As she spoke, every detail, the furtive glances exchanged at family gatherings, the hollow promises wrapped in the guise of concern, transformed into a powerful narrative of resistance. The attendees, inspired by her courage, began to share their own stories of similar exploitation. Each account added a new layer to the tapestry of collective outrage, a mosaic of lives scarred by a system that rewarded the unscrupulous. In that gathering, the seeds of rebellion took root, nurtured by the belief that even the most deeply entrenched corruption could be undone by the collective will of a community united by truth. Amidst this fervor, Mr. Hughes, his eyes distant yet burning with an inner fire, spoke of the legal battles that lay ahead. He explained that the documentation, now in their possession, could serve as undeniable evidence in court, a weapon that would force the conspirators into the harsh light of accountability. His voice, measured and resolute, carried a promise of retribution that mingled with the palpable tension of the meeting. It was a promise that the treachery that had stained Evelyn's life would not go unanswered. Yet, while the seeds of collective action sprouted in hushed tones and secret meetings, the conspirators, sensing the growing tide of dissent, began to tighten their grip. In the opulent corridors of their ancestral mansion, under the pretense of genteel family gatherings, the true nature of their machinations was discussed in guarded whispers. Their plans, once so methodically orchestrated, were now fraying at the edges under the relentless pressure of an awakened community. The patriarch of the group, a man whose silver hair belied his cold-hearted ambition, convened with his most trusted kin in a dimly lit study lined with portraits of long-departed ancestors. There, amidst the ticking of an ancient clock and the soft rustle of expensive fabric, he bemoaned the unexpected solidarity forming against them. His words, laced with a bitter mix of fear and disdain, revealed that their ambitions were now in jeopardy, a realization that sent ripples of disquiet through the ranks. In the following days, the battle lines were drawn more clearly. Evelyn's home became both a sanctuary and a fortress. With the support of Marianne and Mr. Hughes, she installed subtle security measures, small cameras discreetly placed in corners, a hidden alarm system that was as much psychological as it was technological. The very walls that had once cradled her cherished memories now bore witness to her determination to reclaim her life. And throughout these preparations, Rufus remained ever vigilant, his presence a silent, steadfast reminder of the fierce loyalty that had driven him from the desolate streets to become her guardian. During one particularly tense afternoon, as dark clouds gathered in a brooding sky and the first whispers of an oncoming storm mingled with the murmur of restless townsfolk, Evelyn received an unexpected visitor. A young journalist, whose eyes gleamed with the hunger for truth, knocked on her door with a determined urgency. Her name was Clara, and she had been following the trail of anomalies that had emerged around the inheritance scheme for weeks. Clara's presence was both a risk and a promise, a chance that the dark corridors of deceit might finally be illuminated by the unyielding light of investigative reporting. With careful candor, Evelyn shared with Clara the details of her ordeal, the covert meetings, the leaked documents, and the insidious manipulation that had long infiltrated her family's dealings. Clara, her pen poised like a scalpel, listened intently, her notebook filling with every nuance of Evelyn's account. In return, she vowed to bring this story to the public eye, to ensure that the truth, however bitter, could not be silenced by those who sought to bury it under layers of deceit. That evening, as the wind howled outside and the first raindrops began to trace trembling paths down the windowpane, Evelyn felt an unfamiliar mixture of dread and hope. The stakes had been raised, and the community's collective resolve was transforming her personal struggle into a broader fight for justice. In a moment of quiet reflection in her small, candlelit study, she gazed at a faded photograph of her family, once a symbol of love and continuity, and felt a pang of sorrow for what had been lost. Yet, that sorrow was now tempered by the fierce determination to forge a new legacy, one defined not by the greed and treachery of the past, but by the strength and unity of those who refused to be exploited. As midnight approached, the town silence was punctuated by the distant rumble of thunder and the occasional, urgent murmur of voices planning their next steps. In that liminal space between night and dawn, the community, once divided by quiet resignation, stood on the precipice of a reckoning. Evelyn, Marianne, Mr. Hughes, and even the enigmatic Clara had become the vanguard of a grassroots movement, their resolve a beacon of hope in a landscape shadowed by betrayal. Outside, Rufus patrolled with renewed vigor. Each step on the rain-soaked pavement was a declaration of defiance. His keen senses detected the subtle stirrings of danger, furtive movements near the old warehouse, the muted rustle of a tire as a black sedan rolled slowly by in the dead of night. Every detail, however minor, was absorbed into his instinctual vigilance. In the dark, his eyes shone like twin embers, a living reminder that even the smallest creature could become a formidable force against overwhelming odds. Within the walls of the conspirators' mansion, a counterplot was beginning to take shape. The silver-haired patriarch, now visibly agitated by the swelling public interest and the relentless inquiries of the local press, convened a private meeting with his closest advisors. In hushed tones, they deliberated over damage control strategies, debating whether to discredit Evelyn's claims or to force a premature settlement that would seal her fate in their favor. But as they spoke, a growing unease gripped the room, a sense that their carefully constructed edifice of lies was beginning to crumble. Their voices, once confident and measured, now faltered with uncertainty, as though the very walls of the mansion were echoing the collapse of their authority. As the storm outside intensified, so too did the undercurrents of human emotion within the town. In a quiet, deserted street lit only by the intermittent glow of streetlights fighting back the darkness, small groups of citizens met to exchange news and theories. Conversations that began as casual observations soon turned into fervent discussions about justice, accountability, and the urgent need to confront systemic exploitation. In one such impromptu gathering by a shuttered storefront, an elderly man recounted a personal tale of loss, his own experiences with family betrayal that had once left him broken, only to be slowly mended by the unexpected kindness of strangers. His story, raw and unfiltered, resonated deeply with those who listened, reinforcing the emerging consensus that the fight against corruption was a fight for the soul of the community. By the time the first hints of dawn began to disperse the night's gloom, the stage had been set for an inevitable confrontation, a showdown not merely between individuals, but between two very different visions of humanity. One side was defined by self-serving ambition and a ruthless pursuit of wealth, while the other was rooted in the unyielding power of community, empathy, and the courageous act of standing up for one's own truth. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, Evelyn stood at her window, watching as the sky slowly lightened with a melancholy promise of a new beginning. Beside her, Marianne and Mr. Hughes shared a moment of solemn reflection, a silent acknowledgement of the long, arduous road ahead. And just outside the window, Rufus rested alertly, his ears pricked at every soft sound, a living sentinel dedicated to protecting the fragile hope that now glimmered in every heart touched by Evelyn's ordeal. In that silent, expectant moment, it was clear that the coming day would not simply be another page in the community's routine, it would be the crucible in which the future of Evelyn's family, and, by extension, the integrity of an entire town, would be decided. The balance of power was shifting, and as the storm clouds gradually receded, the first rays of a tentative sunrise illuminated the faces of those who had chosen to stand against a tide of treachery. With the rising sun came the promise of accountability, the hope that truth, however long suppressed, would finally find its voice. And as Evelyn prepared to step into that uncertain light, she did so with the resolute knowledge that the bonds of love and community were far stronger than the corrosive forces of greed. The quiet revolution was underway, and every whispered word, every act of defiance, was a step toward reclaiming the dignity that had been so ruthlessly stripped away. As the pale light of dawn faded into a simmering afternoon, an electric tension hung over the town, a tension born of secrets too long kept and the unspoken promise of retribution. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with the murmurs of apprehensive citizens and the quiet determination of those who had gathered to witness the unraveling of a carefully constructed facade. In a modest community center that had long served as a haven for local gatherings, Evelyn found herself surrounded by a small but resolute group. Their eyes, a mixture of defiance and sorrow, reflected the burden of years spent in quiet submission to injustice. Inside the crowded room, every whispered word carried the weight of unspoken history. Tables were cluttered with documents, copies of financial statements, and handwritten testimonies, each piece a testament to the meticulous cruelty of the conspirators. At the center of this makeshift tribunal, Evelyn's voice, soft yet unwavering, spoke of betrayal and the stark, brutal reality that had intruded upon her once peaceful life. She recounted in measured tones the subtle manipulations, the furtive glances at family dinners, and the clandestine meetings that had conspired to strip her of her dignity and legacy. There was no flourish of melodrama, only a raw, unvarnished truth that resonated deeply with everyone present. The journalist, Clara, had her notebook clutched tightly, her pen dancing furiously as she captured every detail. In her eyes burned the need to expose a rot that had long festered beneath the surface of familial warmth. Around them, townsfolk nodded in silent affirmation, their own stories of exploitation, told in hushed tones during late-night conversations and over cups of cooling coffee, wove a tapestry of collective memory and quiet rebellion. Outside, a stark contrast played out on the streets. The conspirators, now desperate and scrambling, convened in a lavish study of the ancestral mansion. The silver-haired patriarch, his normally composed features contorted with a mix of fury and fear, barked orders to his kin. His voice, low and menacing, carried the authority of a man accustomed to commanding obedience. But even as he plotted their next move, a deep-seated paranoia gnawed at him. Each time the grandfather clock chimed, its resonant toll a reminder of time slipping away. His eyes darted toward the heavy drapes and shadowed corners as if expecting an intruder to materialize from the gloom. Back at the community center, the air was electric with the promise of change. Marianne stepped forward, her face set in determined lines. With the calm precision of someone who had weathered many storms, she outlined a plan to leverage the gathered evidence. She spoke of engaging legal authorities, of orchestrating a public forum where the full extent of the corruption would be laid bare for all to see. The plan was audacious, a direct challenge to the entrenched power of the conspirators, but every word was bolstered by the silent strength that emanated from Evelyn's steady gaze. While discussions unfolded indoors, Rufus, ever the silent guardian, patrolled the periphery of Evelyn's modest home. His keen ears and unerring instincts had grown sharper with each passing night, and as he moved through familiar lanes and shadowed alleyways, his body seemed to vibrate with an almost palpable energy. The stray's gaze, dark and unwavering, took in every detail, the glint of a hidden camera in the eaves, the soft murmur of voices plotting in a distant vehicle, the subtle rustle of movement near the old warehouse. Each sound, each flicker of movement, reaffirmed his unyielding commitment to protect the woman who had become his sole charge in a world rife with treachery. The day wore on, and the brewing storm outside mirrored the escalating turmoil within the town. Rain began to fall steadily, a soft, persistent patter against windows and cobblestones that underscored the pervasive melancholy of the hour. The gathering at the community center shifted into a heated debate over strategy. Some insisted that a direct confrontation with the conspirators was inevitable, while others counseled caution, urging that every move be measured to ensure that the culprits would have no recourse to smear the truth later. Amid these deliberations, a young man, his face earnest and marked by the scars of past injustices, spoke quietly but firmly of the need for unity. His words, simple yet potent, stirred the crowd into a focused resolve. It was a call to arms not in violence, but in the pursuit of truth, a reminder that the collective will of the people could be a formidable weapon against even the most entrenched corruption. As the meeting drew to a close, a plan began to take tangible form. The group agreed to stage a public revelation, a carefully orchestrated display of evidence that would force the conspirators into the light. Preparations were to begin immediately. Trusted citizens would accompany Evelyn to secure additional testimonies from those who had suffered in silence. Legal advisors would refine the documentation to ensure its irrefutable quality, and local media, spurred by Clara's relentless pursuit of the story, prepared to broadcast what was certain to be a watershed moment for the community. At the same time, dark forces were gathering in the mansion. The conspirators, sensing that their carefully controlled narrative was on the brink of collapse, resolved to strike preemptively. Late that evening, in a cold, calculated maneuver, they dispatched a pair of men to Evelyn's neighborhood, a subtle warning meant to silence dissent and intimidate those who dared to stand against them. Their arrival was as quiet as it was sinister, their intentions masked behind a veneer of mundane tasks. But for those who knew the undercurrents of power and treachery, it was clear that this was no ordinary visit. The neighborhood, already on edge from the public revelations, seemed to hold its breath as the men moved with an unsettling purpose. A few vigilant residents noticed the unfamiliar vehicles parked too close to Evelyn's home and exchanged nervous glances. In the dim light of street lamps, shadows stretched long and uncertain, as if echoing the internal turmoil of a community caught in the grip of fear. Inside her home, Evelyn felt the weight of the encroaching threat with every beat of her heart. Though frail in body, her spirit was a battlement of quiet strength. She locked the door with deliberate care, her hand steady despite the tremors of anxiety that coursed through her veins. With Rufus at her side, a living embodiment of vigilance, she resolved to wait out the night, trusting in the solidarity of those who believed in her cause. Hours later, as midnight crept over the town and the rain intensified into a torrential downpour, a nervous knock shattered the fragile stillness of Evelyn's living room. The sound was measured, deliberate, a signal that those dispatched by the conspirators had arrived. Heart-pounding, Evelyn approached the door with Rufus at her heels, his body tense as if prepared for battle. She peered through the peephole, catching sight of two figures cloaked in darkness. Their faces were obscured, but the glint of determination, and perhaps menace, was unmistakable. Before she could call out, the door swung open, revealing not aggression but a cautious emissary. It was one of the conspirators' own, a man whose eyes darted about, filled with a conflicted mixture of fear and regret. In a hushed, urgent tone, he pleaded for a moment of understanding. His words, laden with an uncharacteristic vulnerability, suggested that even within the labyrinth of deceit there existed fragments of conscience. He claimed to have witnessed the mounting pressure from higher up, a directive that compelled him to act against his better judgment. His story was riddled with contradictions, yet it carried the weight of someone burdened by a moral dilemma. Evelyn, her eye searching the stranger's face for signs of sincerity, hesitated. In that charged moment, the distance between friend and foe blurred, a reminder that even within the darkest plots, there could be glimmers of redemption. Rufus growled softly, a low, rumbling sound that spoke of caution and protection. The emissary, noticing the animal's stance, took an involuntary step back, his face paling under the cold light of the hallway. In a measured tone, Evelyn invited him to speak, her voice steady despite the tumult within. Over the course of several agonizing minutes, the man divulged fragments of the conspirators' shifting strategy, a plan to quash the public exposure before it could fully take root. His revelations painted a picture of a high-stakes game, where greed and desperation led even the most hardened hearts to waver. Yet, as his confession unfolded, it became apparent that his internal conflict might just be the opening that the community needed, a crack in the armor of an otherwise impenetrable conspiracy. When his account was complete, he slipped away into the night as silently as he had appeared, leaving Evelyn with a torrent of conflicting emotions. The encounter, though brief, reinforced the urgency of their mission. Now, more than ever, every piece of information was a lifeline, a chance to tip the scales in favor of truth and justice. As the storm raged outside, the community center's preparations began to take shape with renewed vigor. In hushed conference rooms and over whispered phone calls, the gathered allies refined their strategy. They would not allow fear to paralyze them. Instead, they resolved to meet the conspirators head-on, not with violence, but with the relentless force of evidence and the solidarity of a people united. The public revelation, scheduled for the following day, would be their declaration of war against a system that had long exploited the vulnerable. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, as the first tentative rays of sunlight began to dispel the darkness, Evelyn stood at her window. Outside, the rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle, and the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what the day would bring. The events of the previous night, filled with betrayal, unexpected mercy, and the promise of change, had left an indelible mark on her soul. With Rufus at her feet, she felt both the sting of past wounds and the faint, persistent warmth of hope. Today would be a turning point, a day when the hidden machinations of greed would be exposed to the unyielding light of truth. and as the town stirred awake, each citizen carrying the weight of their own quiet rebellions, the stage was set for a reckoning that would redefine the very fabric of their community. In that fragile dawn, the promise of accountability shone through the lingering mists, a beacon for those determined to reclaim their dignity and build a future free from the chains of betrayal. With a final, resolute glance at the documents piled on her small desk, a tangible reminder of both the darkness she had endured and the strength that had carried her thus far, Evelyn prepared herself to step out into the uncertain light of day. In that moment, the old woman and her loyal guardian, the silent rebel and her steadfast allies, became the living embodiment of a simple, transformative truth that even in the face of overwhelming greed and corruption, the human spirit, when united by compassion and truth, could rise to challenge the night and usher in a new dawn. As the sun ascended over the horizon with a reluctant glow, the town gathered one last time at the community center, a modest building that had become the crucible of change. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the weight of every truth uncovered and every tear shed in the struggle for justice. Evelyn, her hand steady despite the years and the scars of betrayal, stood before the assembled crowd. Her voice, though soft, resonated with the quiet authority of a life weathered by hardship and injustice. With each carefully chosen word, she recounted the long and painful journey, from the first ominous signs of deceit within her own family to the steadfast presence of Rufus, the stray dog who had become her guardian angel against a tide of greed. The evidence, painstakingly gathered by dedicated allies and validated by local authorities, was laid bare for all to see. Stacks of documents and photographs, the tangible remnants of a conspiracy that had spanned years, were displayed on a long table, their significance undeniable. The community listened in rapt silence as Evelyn detailed every calculated move and every hidden transaction designed to wrest control of her inheritance. In her measured tone, there was no room for theatrics, only the raw, unembellished truth that had been wrenched from the shadows and forced into the light. Marianne, standing close by, exchanged a look of shared resolve with Evelyn. Their quiet alliance had blossomed into a full-fledged movement, one that united a once divided town against the machinations of a family that had long taken its power for granted. The local journalist, Clara, her pen still poised as if capturing the very heartbeat of the moment, recorded every detail. Each word that fell from Evelyn's lips was a rebuke to a system steeped in corruption, a promise that no one would be left to suffer in silence again. Outside, Rufus roamed the periphery with an almost regal dignity. The stray, whose loyalty had defied explanation and whose courage had been as constant as the tide, moved slowly along the edge of the gathering. His presence, a silent emblem of the unexpected heroism that could be found in the most unassuming of forms, was a comfort to those who had come to believe that true guardianship was not confined to the realms of human strength alone. Every person in attendance felt that his steadfast vigilance had been the catalyst for the unearthing of the truth. In the days that followed, legal authorities moved swiftly. The conspirators, once ensconced in the opulent confines of their ancestral mansion, found themselves exposed to a public scrutiny they could neither anticipate nor evade. Courtrooms echoed with the sound of shuffling papers and measured testimony. The labyrinthine web of deceit, built on layers of false promises and hollow familial affection, was dismantled piece by piece. For the first time in decades, accountability was no longer an abstract concept but a force that surged through the corridors of justice. The town, once held captive by the silent tyranny of concealed corruption, began to heal. Neighbors who had whispered furtively in darkened doorways now shared stories openly, their voices a tapestry of both sorrow and hope. Each conversation, though tinged with the melancholy of what had been lost, was also imbued with the promise of a brighter, more honest future. The local press, invigorated by Clara's fearless reporting, carried the story far beyond the borders of the small community, transforming a personal tragedy into a universal call for integrity and compassion. Evelyn, though battered by the betrayal of those she had once held dear, found in herself a reservoir of strength that defied the years. In quiet moments after the storm of revelations had passed, she would sit by her window with a cup of tea, watching the interplay of light and shadow on the familiar streets. There, in the soft, reflective glow of dusk, she recalled not just the pain of lost trust, but the profound transformation that had come with it. she saw in the faces of her neighbors and in the determined eyes of those who had rallied around her a vision of community reborn, a unity forged in the crucible of shared struggle and the relentless pursuit of truth. And then there was Rufus, whose legacy was written not in words but in every cautious step, every protective stance taken on nights filled with uncertainty. He had been more than a stray dog, he had been a beacon of loyalty in a world where trust was a scarce commodity. As the seasons turned and the scars of past conflicts began to fade into memories, Rufus continued his quiet patrol, a reminder that sometimes salvation comes in forms that are as simple as a gentle, unwavering heart. In the final reckoning, the sinister inheritance scheme crumbled under the weight of collective resolve. The corrupt ambitions of a few had been vanquished by the resolute spirit of a community determined to uphold dignity and justice. And in that victory, there lay a promise that in the face of overwhelming darkness, even the smallest light could ignite a revolution. Thus, as the town emerged into a new era defined not by the cold machinations of greed but by the warmth of shared humanity, the story of Evelyn and her steadfast guardian was etched into the collective memory. It was a tale of quiet heroism and indomitable resilience, a reminder that true strength often arises from the most unexpected sources. And in the gentle unfolding of each new day, the legacy of that unlikely alliance, of an elderly woman who dared to reclaim her life and the stray dog who guarded her with unwavering loyalty, lived on as a beacon for all who believed that even the deepest wounds could heal, and that even in the midst of betrayal, hope would always find a way to shine through.